This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Spring Creek Model Trains. Family owned for nearly 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. You know, over the last several years, I've been witness to the demise of several model railroad layouts. It's the sad yet inevitable fate that most of our creations face. But on this episode, we get to tell a different story. A story of a son who has taken his father's layout and preserved it and actually has made it his own. Joining me from just outside of Houston, Texas, Michael Spoor. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Ray. I'm a big fan of your podcast. It's a pleasure to be on it this day.
All right. Well, it's great to have you here. And I can tell you who's a big fan of you. That's Chuck Stansel, who reached out to me and said, you've got to get Michael on this show because he is really interesting. I guess he had operated at your layout and just was wildly impressed with you enough for him to write 3 paragraphs about you in an email to me to say, get this guy on the show. So glad to have you here. And another guy who's become a big fan of you, it was a guy I was just talking to prior to the show, is Matthew Fricks. He's up there in Illinois taking care of ATLP 2022 car and I was telling him that I was about to interview you. He said, I had to ask how to become such a big Santa Fe fan. So there must be an inside joke to that.
Modeler. So he did that as an inside joke during the Santa Fe comment there. Yeah, whenever he has a video or photo Santa Fe train, I always throw.
That's too funny. There's Matt right there stirring some trouble. So awesome here on the podcast. You've got a really cool story. And once I read this email from Chuck, I was like, yeah, definitely got to get you on here and talk. So I know that you have a layout that you essentially inherited from your father and one you grew up around, and you've made it your own and with a hint back to the past. So that'll definitely be a really interesting story to hear from you. But before we get into all that, why don't you tell us how you got started in model railroading?
Well, similar to what you said, I have a similar story to Gilbert Freitag, another guy in Houston. We both basically were born into like large operating layouts. From as a little kid, I started operating on Dad's layout, some of the other layouts in Texas. So even when I was a little kid, a lot of people have Brio trains or Thomas the Tank Engine trains. I had those as a kid, but with my Brio trains, I made locals that ran out of a yard. So instead of just running my Brio trains on the floor, I made a local which switched industries that I made, and I had switchless. My industries were little cheapo things I made from shoe boxes or something. I taped cereal labels from that, or like soda box labels. So all my industries were Cheerios factories and Pepsi factories. But I made cheapo switchless where I took a piece of printer paper, then just hand wrote on 2 cars going to Cheerios, 2 cars going to Pepsi. And I just did that for my many Brio operating sessions that I had. Then obviously as I grew older, I'd operate locals on HO layouts and N-scale layouts around town.
I'd say you were probably one of the most advanced Brio operators I've ever heard of. And that's pretty phenomenal. You got that great influence from, I'm sure, your dad and, seeing him operate and learned it from there. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah. As a little kid, I wasn't old enough to run, a yard or run locals on the layouts around town. But I tried to incorporate that on my own, Brio layout on the floor. And I guess my knowledge of, switching cars like with Brio stuff on the floor, helped me later in life to run, yards and run locals on, HO and N-scale, layouts around Texas growing up.
That's definitely an awesome start. So you got the Brio layout, and then were you also operating on your dad's layout as well? Was he had you up there and teaching you? Were you participating in any operating sessions?
At first, I only ran passenger trains, and then as I grew older, I started to do locals, then run the yard, and then run the coach yard. When I was a little kid, the layout ran on Dynatrol, which was one of the pre-DCC systems. If people know Dynatrol, there are only, I think, 26 or 28 channels. So you could only have 26 or 28 engines. And there were these red pins which went into the throttle, which controlled those. So if you had to run more than the minimum, 26 engines, you had to have toggles in the layout which shut off that track. So you wouldn't have two trains running at the same time and the same pin. So when I was a little kid, people would hand me the pin, and I'd crawl under the layout and crawl to the other side of the layout and hand someone in the other staging yard the pin so I could run another train from that pin. So the first nickname I had as a little kid was the Pin Monkey. So I was like a little monkey crawling under the layout, going between the staging yards, handing off a pin so someone in the other side of the layout could run the next train.
You came in handy as the short person. It's funny. I said that to a friend the other day. It's like, I need a short, thin model railroading buddy because I can't fit in those areas. And I'm not even what I need is a little kid to be able to get in there and do those things like you were doing. Your role as the Pin Monkey.
Yeah. A lot of people, they only know DCC and systems, but some of the earlier systems like CTC 80 or Dynatrol or stuff, it wasn't nearly as advanced. We could run 300 engines on your layout or something. You had to kind of get creative to run. If you wanted to have 20, 30 trains in operating session, you had to get creative.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure the challenges and the things that we take for granted nowadays with the advanced DCC systems of today's era, kind of forgotten the DC and the Dynatrol and all those other type operating systems on the layouts that made it a little more complicated. But great place to start. I mean, your dad's into the hobby and it got you into it, and again an advanced start on your model railroading journey.
Yeah, I remember as a kid we would go to Kansas City and Chicago and Dallas, operate on other people's layouts. So I could, see other layouts that people have done, other operating schemes. And of course, we would always, when we went to Chicago, we would always rail fan on, the BN racetrack there, which certainly influenced me wanting to model, the BN racetrack in the 90s, which is when I went there. And then also, growing up in Houston, 99% of the rail fanning we did in Houston was on SP. But on the BN racetrack in the 90s, SP had trackage rights trains over there. So sometimes you would see as many SP trains on the BN going into Chicago as you would BN or Metro trains. So there's a lot of variety that you could see there.
Yeah, you definitely get to catch a really cool era in prototype railroading, being able to see that in the BN era. And I'm sure that left enough of an impression on you, obviously, to model the BN nowadays.
Yeah, there was a lot of variety. On BN, right around the merger in 95 on the racetrack, besides BN trains, you obviously had Metro trains, you had Amtrak trains, you had the SP run-through trains, you had Canadian National run-through trains, which came from the north. Sometimes you had Conrail run-through trains, and you had the Commonwealth Edison coal trains, which came into there. So there's a wide variety of trains which you could see on the BN racetrack in the 90s.
What an awesome opportunity to see all that. So as far as model railroading goes, how soon were you getting involved with anything that was like on your dad's layout as far as like, kit building, or were you able to do that with your dad and have that opportunity?
Some of the freight cars in the layout I would build. Now I would help out with some of the scenery on the layout. Probably the area I helped out the most and what I enjoyed most on is just doing like prototypical research on the layout. So researching like car routing, researching, like the timetables for what certain trains and that stuff. Yeah, even today, that's probably so I spend most of my modeling time on just doing prototypical research. and less on the actual model building.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. You really drill down on the details and really are into, I guess the word is emulation, right? You want to get as close to a real emulation of what the railroad was doing through all that research, through learning all of that information. Where were you getting that information from? Talk about your research.
You're just like equipment registers or timetables. I would go with that, and we would interview people who actually worked on the railroads, which is nice.
Yeah.
That one of the biggest resources is the employee timetables. This is actually one of them. It's the 1959 employee timetable for the CB&Q, Chicago, and Aurora divisions. And if you go in there, it gives you every single passenger train and mainline freight train that ran on that line in 1959. It gives you the times they left each terminal, and for passenger trains, each station. And if you go on the bottom, it's interesting. It gives, for passenger trains, it gives you the time it took to go between Chicago and Aurora, and the minutes time, and it gave the average miles per hour time.
Wow.
I don't know how they calculated that, but most of the passenger trains that didn't stop, they averaged about 60 miles per hour. So a lot of people don't think that, but
wow.
Like in the back, it also gives like some of the the rules, and it also gives the speed restrictions on the line. And in the 50s, most of the line was 70 miles per hour and even 75 miles per hour.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty. A lot of people only think the Northeast Corridor stuff. You had trains that fast, but in the 1950s and 60s on the the racetrack, you go 75 miles per hour between some of the towns.
Yeah, and for that kind of weight and that is moving. Holy mackerel, is that moving?
Yeah, a lot of obviously like the dinkies or suburban trains stopped at most of the towns, but a lot of the passenger trains would only stop in one town or no town, so between Chicago and Aurora. So they could easily make 70 miles per hour between those two towns.
So what I gather is you say you were going around and, you would interview railroaders and gather all that information. Dad was cooperating in that. Was Dad just as much drilled into all those details as you were, or did you kind of pull him into the higher level of detail?
I definitely got it from him because he wrote a lot of books on the CB&Q and a lot of articles on the CB&Q. So a lot of those trips is just me going with him, like watching him interview those people. And eventually over the years, I started to, talk to those people myself. As a little kid, I would go with them to some, former CB&Q guy's basement, and he would just interview the guy for an hour and ask him, every question humanly possible about the CB&Q and whatever town the guy worked on. And over the years, I've met some BN guys who work in those same towns. So I've asked them, a million questions about, what freight cars went to what industry, or what types of engines switched this yard in a specific time period. And luckily, some of that information I've, written down so I can actually, remember it later on.
Well, that's great. What an awesome start. And again, model railroader of your dad. And then that he's so into the history and writing books about it, and the opportunity to go meet real railroaders as a kid and then see how the whole process is done. What an awesome opportunity you were given there, Michael.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. And I'm glad we went on some of those trips. So it certainly made my modeling easier because we have photos of, the locals that I model now we took photos, every single car on the train. And sometimes we would interview, the engineer who actually ran that train to the secrets of what, that local did, in this year in this town.
So hopefully graduating from being the pin monkey, I see that another nickname you had as a kid was the Psycho Switchman. There's got to be a great backstory to that. Why don't you share that with us?
That nickname kind of grew from my Brio days of running operating sessions. As I grew up, especially as a teenager, when I went to layouts, all I ever wanted to do was run a local or switch a yard. So people quickly called me the Psycho Switchman, because all I ever did when I went to layouts is I wanted to run locals the entire time or switch a yard the entire time. So I guess I quickly became, the Psycho Switchman, as they said. became like a switching guru, I guess.
Nothing wrong with that. I know quite a few guys that are psycho switchmen that don't want anything to do with through trains, and they want the switching jobs. And if you put them in an area and just leave them alone there, that's what they want to do for hours on end. So nothing wrong with that nickname. I think it's a compliment in the world of operating model railroad trains. So
even today, that's generally what I enjoy doing, is just switching. Like on my operating sessions, I run the passenger coach yard. So even today, generally when I go to layouts, what I mainly do is just like run a yard or run a local somewhere.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. I mean, I found an interest in doing yards, and there's a couple of reasons I've found that yards are, kind of fun, and they work out well for me. I think maybe the first one is physical. I'm a big guy. And if I can be left in a certain area and not have to transverse the entire layout all the time or try to get by people, especially in smaller, narrow places, I'm happier, because I like the people I operate with, but I don't need to be intimate with them as far as bumping into them all the time and rubbing into them. And then just something about sorting, just something really enjoyable about the sorting process that comes with a yard, classifying and cutting trains up. And I just really enjoy that aspect. So I get it for sure. Why that's desirable to you, and for other reasons for yourself as well. So let's fast forward a little bit, and you talk about, this great start as a kid, and then I'm sure you got into teenage years, and then I see here that you joined the military. Is that correct?
Yes, I was in the Army 10 years. When I was in the Army, I didn't do that much modeling, so I kind of felt like my modeling skills were eroding. So I just started to build dioramas. So at first I built like military dioramas, and I would start to build like HO scale dioramas. I usually wouldn't have too much space for them, so I built basically 2 dioramas. Then when I finished, I'd just throw one like in the dumpster, then basically start that process again.
Wow.
Yeah. When I was in Korea, I almost started an international incident doing that. I tried to find, like pink foam so I could carve out dioramas. It took me a while to find one. I had to travel about an hour and a half on the train in Korea. I went to this it was like a bookstore / hobby shop. They had those big, pink foam things, but I didn't have a car. So I took this giant, 6-foot sheet of pink foam with me on the subway in Seoul. There definitely were a lot of Koreans who were very mad at me that day.
Oh boy, yeah, definitely not helping with diplomatic relations over there with carrying that pink foam on the subway. But hey, you got to get it back to the barracks somehow, right?
With that one sheet of pink foam, I think I made 3 dioramas from it, though. And that pretty much lasted me a year. So that trip was worth it, though, in the end.
That's awesome.
And one of those dioramas actually kept. I didn't throw away all of them.
Oh, that's great. And you're able to bring it back home with you. A great memory of being in Korea. And then it looks like you were able to do some other model railroad related stuff over there in Korea.
Another upside of being in Korea is I got to see some of the brass manufacturers when I was there. One of the Korean soldiers I worked with, we researched like where the Asian factory was and other stuff. So I basically he wrote a note for me that basically said like, I'm an American soldier and I like model trains. Can you let me see your Asian factory? And it actually worked. I got a tour of several of the brass factories when I was there.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, taking advantage of your deployment and being able to see those things. That's really cool. And then just to keep up with the hobby, by building dioramas and everything else, it's really nice that you were able to, at least keep your skills kind of in tune a little bit and keep that flywheel somewhat turning for, while you're in the service. And I'm sure that definitely helped keep things going when you got back home.
Yeah. After I was in Korea and Afghanistan, that's when I actually built my own layout when I was in Virginia. So all those dioramas I built actually did help me like keep up my modeling skills.
So tell us about that. You're back in Virginia and you build yourself a switching layout. Tell us about that.
Yes, when I came back to the U.S., I moved to Virginia. I was there 5 to 6 years. It was right before COVID. So luckily I had 2 bedrooms. Now I planned on building like a small switching layout in one of the bedrooms. Because I was from Houston originally. I modeled BN. I immediately thought of modeling BN's North Houston Industrial Park. So I built that around, I built the yard there. Then like a curve went around the wall. Then I have 2 industrial peninsulas, which like simulated the industrial park BN had there. Some of those industries are still there today, but in the 90s and 80s, that was a big area. Like, of a historical note for Houston, the first Coors beer distribution plant was on that BN switched area in Houston. Came there, I think, in the early 80s. Yeah, so if you're a fan of Smokey and the Bandit or like Coors beer in the 80s, the BN brought the first Coors beer into Houston in that industrial area.
Oh, no kidding. No kidding. That's pretty cool. So, I mean, you talk about a switching layout, but it sounded like it was a pretty big switching layout.
That, like, on one wall was the yard. Then it just curved down and went to 2 like big industrial peninsulas that went down the middle.
Wow.
The main industry I actually got from Chuck Hitchcock's Argentine layout, the big like warehouse that he had. I changed that to be a Houston warehouse. Yeah, that one industry could take you about an hour to switch. Because there's 4 tracks, and each track had, I think, 3 or 4 doors. Now my switch list, I would have you send a card like door 1 or door 3 or something. So it's that one industry alone could take you an hour to switch.
I got to ask, when I'm thinking about you in Virginia now, and you build this in your apartment, even in the military, and I'm thinking carrying that foam again on the subway, and building your dioramas. Did you meet any fellow modelers while you were in the military?
In the military, no. But when I was stationed in Virginia, I knew a lot of the like modelers who had layouts in the Virginia area. So I operated on probably like 10 different layouts in like the DC, Virginia, Maryland area.
Oh, wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah, so maybe like once a month I'd like go into DC to operate on some of the layouts there. Yeah, there's a lot of really nice, in the DC area, there are a lot of really nice layouts to operate on.
You really made good use of that 5 years in Virginia by seeing so many layouts and meeting a whole bunch of people. That's really good.
Yeah, it was nice. So some of those people, like I still talk to today, and like even last year I went back to DC and operated on some of those layouts. Yeah, that's just one thing I like about your podcast, is just getting to know people in like various parts of the countries and layouts that they have.
Yeah, it's quite amazing. And the people that you get to meet, and I still just imagine there's a whole bunch of modelers that we still don't even know about. But when you stick your head out, whether it be through the podcast or, Facebook groups or attending, train shows or getting involved in the NMRA or conventions or whichever way, it's just amazing the amount of people that you meet. And of course, we're living in the golden era of model railroading where, the internet is helping drive all this and getting us connected to a whole bunch of new people, and podcasts being just a small part of a contribution to that. So yeah, it's really neat, the community that gets built.
Yeah, it's they think of 20 years ago before podcasts and it's like Facebook train groups.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome stuff. So what are some of the memorable layouts that you got to see while you were in Virginia?
Before I even moved to Virginia, I met Bernie Kempinski. So when I actually moved to Virginia area, I became one of his like usual operators there. So maybe like once a month or something, I would operate on his layout.
Oh, awesome.
And like he got to see, to see some of the other layouts in the area. Like his Civil War layout is really like fun to operate on and incredibly well made. And he used to have the Port of Los Angeles layout, which is also a really fun layout to switch. It just shows how much like you can build this incredibly detailed layout just on basically like an L section of a wall. And now that layout has been taken over by like an expansion of the Civil War layout. And someone else in the DC area bought that layout. I think he said I was the second person to operate on his Port of Los Angeles layout, and I was the last person to operate on the layout before he sold it to someone else.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you got to put your name on that, huh? And be able to say that you operated it before it goes away. And so that's really cool with Bernie. And then who else did you get to meet in that area?
There's a Paul Dolkos. He and Dad were friends. He lives maybe 10 minutes away in Alexandria. His home is actually one of the easiest homes to find because at the rail tunnel in Alexandria, he lives maybe like a block away from that. So I could pretty much remember on memory how to get to his house. Yeah, but Paul had an incredible like Baltimore Harbor layout, which has been in all the magazines and videos and stuff. He recently sold it to another modeler in the Maryland area who plans on expanding the size of it. So it's nice to see layouts like that get saved instead of being torn out, which sadly you've seen on like some other layouts. That's one of the biggest reasons I wanted to move back to Texas, to make sure like Dad's layout got saved and actually finished it. It wasn't torn out like some other layouts that have happened in the past couple of years.
Yeah, that's definitely, it seems like that's the inevitable fate of a lot of layouts. Sometimes they're just not easy to save, but when the effort's put in to save some of these masterpieces, it's definitely really cool. And see them go on to another life is a really neat thing to see.
Yeah. Another one of the layouts in Houston was Gil Freitag's layout. That was an incredible layout. Sadly, that layout was torn out last year, but 100% of the buildings and structures were saved and are now being used on other people's layouts, which is nice. And the big bridge scene, if I recall, that was being donated to like the NMRA Museum. So even if the layout's torn out, at least like it's nice to see like buildings and structures being incorporated on other people's layouts.
Absolutely. So 5 years in Virginia, and then you head back home to the Houston area. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I moved back about 2 years ago. I've been just trying to finish as much scenery as I can in that time period. Pretty much my entire life is doing ballast these days.
So tell us the story here, because I think it's a really powerful story about your dad's layout and your dad. When did your dad pass?
2013.
So you were still kind of out in the Virginia area at that time, right? Or were you still in the military? You were still in the military back when he passed, right?
Yeah, I was in the military then. So it took me a while to be able to even get back to Texas. Yeah, it took me years to be able to get back here.
Yeah, so it was like 10 years or so. Your dad's layout kind of just stayed dormant, right? Or so.
Yeah, when I was at Fort Hood, I would come down on weekends and work in the layout. Yeah, but then I went to Virginia. There was basically like a 6-year period where the layout was pretty much dormant. Yeah, so it took us several months to do like maintenance on the layout to basically bring it back to like operating. The maintenance we did was mainly just replacing a few switches, and there are some areas that just needed to be tinkered with, just like lubing up some engines and stuff. After maybe 3 months of that, we got the layout running back well how it used to be. After that, then the biggest issue was the backdrop, because the layouts in South Texas with heat and humidity, after about 10 to 15 years, the layout backdrop started to majorly peel. It peeled to the point where I didn't want visitors to come over. So I had to hire a local artist who'd work at some other layouts in town. And he like scraped off the peeling backdrop and repainted about 75% of the entire backdrop in the layout. Wow. That took him a couple weeks to do.
So was the original backdrop like a hand painted backdrop? Is that what your dad had installed on it?
Yes, he hired some artist in the 90s to do it. But apparently that artist used the wrong types of paint. So that combined with like Texas heat and humidity, eventually the backdrop just started peeling horribly. Yeah, I could show you pictures of what it looked like 3 years ago and what it looks like now. It's a dramatic change. After he finished redoing that, I actually gave him some other projects to paint. Like me and another guy in town, we would give him prototype photos of structures and bridges, and he would paint that on the backdrop. And he did such a good job that in photos, some people think it's actually a photo backdrop, but he actually hand painted all the buildings.
Oh, amazing talent.
Yeah, for his job and his day job, he paints murals and stuff for the city. So he has a lot of experience doing this. And it helps also that his father was a model railroader in town also. So he knows, the dimensions and stuff of the background. I didn't have to tell him, like, this is what an HO engine looks like. He knew it already because his father had an HO layout in town. So that was definitely helpful.
Yeah, well, it's definitely great to find somebody that knows what they're talking about and understands model railroading and able to provide you with exactly what you need for those backdrops. And we'll share all of those photos on our website. That's aroundthelayout.com/107. So, yeah, I mean, imagine the layout, sitting 10 years, and you talked about the things that had to be done, just sitting dormant. It must have been a challenge, but it's really cool that you got this thing back up and running. And what changes did you, other than the backdrop and, you talked about a couple of maintenance things, did you keep it true to what your dad had, or did you kind of make it your own a little bit?
I made it my own to a degree. Like the layout era was originally 1954, and I moved it to 1959 because that's when the SD24s were delivered. And that just gives me more like flexibility with the roster.
Now, I was hinted in by Matt Fricks to ask you about your billboards, because that hints to me that you may run it a little bit more modern from time to time. And what a really neat idea. Tell us about your billboards and how you occasionally bring fast forward a little bit of the era of the layout.
Yeah, in January of next year, I'm going to start alternating every 6 months between operating in 1959 and 1995. I just wanted to make sure when people walked in, they immediately knew, they were in 1959 or 1995. And one of the best ways I found to do that is just have year-specific billboards across the layout. So for both years, I would find like movie posters from that year or famous advertisements, and then make that a billboard. So in this PowerPoint, I just scaled them down to the size of the Walters billboards, and I just placed them around the layout. Just when you walk in, you immediately know, like, this movie came out in 1995 or this movie came out in 1959.
And they're double-sided, right? So you can flip them over. Did I hear Matt to explain it right?
A couple of them are that way, and some I just have a duplicate one that I just move up, and it's the different year. Another thing that I started to do last year in operating sessions was period music. So I made a 1959 music playlist of about 200 songs. And then for the 90s sessions, I made a music playlist with about 200 songs from 1995.
Oh, that's awesome.
One of my train guys, he's big into collecting and restoring radios. So he actually brought over a radio, which was made in 1959. And he somehow hooked up an iPod to it. So we can play my playlist on an iPod out of the 1959 radio, which is pretty cool.
Oh, man, talk about authentic. You got the radio of the era playing songs of the era. Although the device that's driving it's a little new, and I'm sure nobody in 1959 ever envisioned an MP3 player or an iPod being hooked up to it. So that's pretty wild. And yeah, it's neat. I just think it's really touching, that you were able to inherit your dad's layout. You kept it going. It didn't see the demise that a lot of the layouts seem to get, which is when the layout owner passes, usually it's not too long after, and you got a good group of friends in there dismantling the thing and hauling it away. But not for this one. You get to keep this whole thing going, which is really cool.
Yeah, a lot of the guys who originally built the layout, still operate here and still help me with the maintenance and stuff. So they definitely are very happy that I wanted to keep it going and improve it in ways that they spent years of their lives building this. They didn't want to see it end up in a dumpster like some other layouts sadly have in the past 5 years.
So why don't you tell us the story of this layout as far as its current 1959 operations? What does the railroad do? Where does it serve? And tell us a little bit about what operations look like on it.
The layout is the CB&Q racetrack, which goes from Chicago to Aurora. Then the one corner of the layout is Montgomery, where the lines split. Then one of the lines goes to staging, which is Galesburg. Then the other line goes up. It goes up to then it goes to Rochelle, then Savannah, then staging there. So 3/4 of the layout is Chicago to Aurora, and like the triple track racetrack. Then the one track goes up, which goes north towards St. Paul, that line. Then one of the staging yards is like the northernmost one. An operating session, it depends how many people come, but operating session is normally 4 hours long. Wow. And you run between 40 and 50 trains, and about half of those are passenger trains.
That's a lot of trains. It's a lot of developing of an operating scheme. Holy mackerel.
Yeah. When I restage, if I restage by myself, it takes about 7 or 8 hours to restage the layout.
Wow.
Yeah,
what size is it, and what size room is this layout in?
I think it's 40 by 25.
Oh, wow.
Then, yeah, it was designed so all of the staging yards are in one room, which is convenient for restaging and in operating sessions. One guy's job in the operating station is basically the staging master. So he controls what tracks and staging the trains go in and out of, and he coordinates with the dispatcher on that. We've tried it before where you don't have that position. It can be kind of hectic. So yeah, that's a pretty key position. It's basically the staging guru position.
How are you dispatching the layout?
We have one dispatcher. He's dispatched the layout for probably the past, 20 years. He's pretty much an expert on what all the trains do. Yeah, we have like a dispatcher at Cubbyhole, which is in the middle of the staging area. Actually, it was after 2 operating sessions ago, I got together with him. We changed the dispatcher sheet. So the last operating session was the first time using the new dispatcher sheet, and it definitely worked better from when we both saw. Even if you have a layout that's existed for a million years, there's still always ways you continuously improve the operations or the layout itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was just thinking that, guys, see, it's really cool that you have a seasoned dispatcher, guy that's been doing it for 20 years that knows the layout very well. And I'm sure that that definitely helps, and then now instead of teaching things over and over, now you can spend some time doing those continuous improvements.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely helpful. One thing I want to start doing more often is not the dispatcher, but some of the other positions, just rotating people between them. Like, I think we realized that some people had done basically the same position for, 10, 15, 20 years. So we want to make sure we rotated people around so people are familiar with all the positions. And also, if someone does a new position, then they always come up with like new ideas or new ways of doing it. If someone comes up with like a better way or a faster way, we'll try to implement that for the next operating session.
Yeah, it's always good to get new eyes on things. And it's funny, even when you're a layout owner and you've created an operating scheme and you have people come over for the first time to run it and you watch them do it completely different than the way you thought it was going to be done. And I've experienced that. And I know a lot of others have experienced that as well. But yeah, always good to get a fresh set of eyes on things and, help improve the experience. And, there's also, no matter which way you do it, there's always going to be a guy that figures out just a slightly different way of doing it, which is, to me, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I agree. Basically, I try to give like the yard operators or people who run locals, basically it's like, I'll give them like suggestions or something, but how they go about the yard, how they go to the locals is entirely up to them. So I did have the same experience as you. Often when I go to layouts, people say, like, I run a yard or run a local differently than how people normally do it. And like in future sessions, they'll maybe incorporate those ideas. People usually say operate much faster. People say like, I'll operate a local or do a yard like much faster than how it's normally done.
See, I'm the opposite. I do it the most inefficient way, and that's only just because of me, right? I seemingly find the most inefficient way to do things, and it takes me slightly longer, but I'm enjoying myself nonetheless. And, I make plenty of mistakes, or, realize that I've buried a car that I need to spot, or, I've got to make 3 more moves that I shouldn't have had to move, but oh, well, I get to spend more time running trains. So I guess it's a victory for me. So I'm thinking as you're talking about this, and what folks won't be able to see other than the screenshot I'll share on our operating crew page, is the thinking about the logistics of changing from era to era, you've probably got, quite a bit of rolling stock and everything else to support all this operations. When you flip it, are you changing all the rolling stock and all the power on the layout too?
Yeah, 100% of the equipment will be changed.
Wow, that must be one heck of a process. I mean, you talked about 8 hours just to restage it. I mean, what's it take to go from, 59 to 95?
I haven't actually done it yet, but I've moved around a few trains. It takes me maybe like 10 minutes a train to do that. But I have some filing cabinets where I can store about 10 trains, and I have a ton of storage boxes. Most of the passenger trains actually won't move. They'll just stay in the Chicago staging yard. Because in the 90s, there were significantly less passenger trains in the line than in the 50s. So in the 90 sessions, the California Zephyr and the Illinois Zephyr in each direction, and then all the Metro dinky or commuter trains. Yeah, but 90% of the trains in the 90 sessions will be freight trains, which will clearly be different than the 50s one where it's pretty much 50-50 between freight and passenger trains.
Yeah, for sure. So you have enough room in staging to be able to store all the older stuff and then be able to run the newer stuff out on the layout too? You got plenty of staging yards, or you're going to have to pull quite a bit?
Yeah, for the passenger equipment, I do. For the 90 sessions, I only need 2 tracks in Chicago. So the rest of the tracks in Chicago, I can just use as storage for passenger trains. Okay.
That's really cool. It's a really neat concept of being able to run 2 different eras on a layout. It's really kind of the first time I've heard anybody doing that. It's just something that you just had a desire, wanted to be able to run more modern. Have you ever seen this been done before, or is it just something that you've kind of come up with in your own mind?
I've done it before myself, actually. There's another modeler in Houston, Al Partlow, and he models the Southern Pacific from Houston to Dallas. There's maybe 5 or 6 years where we took off his 1950s SP equipment and then turned into a 1994 SP operating session. And then working with some of the SP guys here, we came up with what all the correct industries and trains were. And like here, all the buildings are removable. So if a building wasn't there in the 90s, we would just remove it and then replace it with the building that was there in the 90s.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So luckily for me here, pretty much 99% of the buildings are removable. So I'm now building, like if it wasn't there in the 90s, I'm now building the building that would be there in the 90s. Except for bridges, pretty much everything is removable. So the bridges are really the only thing that wouldn't be accurate for the 90s. You'll just have to pretend that the bridge is silver when you go over it.
Well, that's all right. You can suspend some disbelief, but you've covered a lot of it. I mean, as far as, changing signs and billboards and, just bringing everybody to that era. It's again, really neat concept. It just, wild the things that you can do. And I just keep thinking about how much history you can show and change. And it's just a really neat, I'm really impressed. It's a really cool idea.
I was surprised at how little actually changed. If you go through like Highlands or Hinsdale or Naperville, outside of some of the stations, virtually everything is pretty much the same as it was in the 50s. Now in like the last 10 years, BNSF has removed most of the like QBN signal bridges, but for the 90s, it was still the same.
Yeah, what would it be like 30 some odd years? Is my math right? The difference between the 2 eras? What, 35, 30, about 35 years, 34 years, 35 years. I can't do math off the top of my head. But yeah, that's, there's a lot of things that last that long too. So I can see that some of it would probably look the same or similar. And yeah, really, really neat. So how do your operators, I mean, they must have been tickled after 10 years of the layout not being there to see it come back to life. You must have been like the hero of the group for sure to get this thing going again.
Yeah, they were definitely excited. Yeah, the first operating session was, I think, maybe March of last year. So after doing 2 of those, we pretty much worked out like the schedule and all the bugs. And after, I think, the second one, we brought back the Chicago coach yard. So now the entire layout is operating how it used to. And this is one of the few layouts that has an actual operating coach yard for the station. Yeah, Houston apparently seems to be an area for that. So I think there are 4 layouts in town that have passenger stations with large coach yards that you switch.
Well, that's neat. And that's a job in itself, isn't it?
Yeah. And the layout, it's a 2-man job. You have one who just switches the passenger trains from the consist that I have. And then the other guy is mainly, he runs the engines between the station and the engine facility. Then he also sometimes also moves some of the cars. Yeah, it's a 2-man job, and it keeps you occupied for pretty much the entire session.
What are you using for operating system on that layout?
We use Easy DCC still. It's fairly older, but I didn't feel like upgrading it. Yeah, one of the limitations, it has a max of 250 engines. Modeling 2 different eras, I'm over 200 on there. So I have to watch myself down, over the limit. Because some other people also bring their engines here to run. So I have to make sure I just don't go over the 250 limit for the system.
Well, that's pretty, I imagine it, a major expense, especially a layout that size and what you've got into it already. It would be a challenge to upgrade, but if it's working and it seems like it's working pretty well to be able to hold operating sessions and run as much as you run on it, that's very well done.
Yeah, we've had no issues. It was a big change from my layout in Virginia where I had 1 engine.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah,
and these operating sessions, sometimes you have up to 50 engines running. So it's a dramatic change.
So the layout still resides in the home you grew up in. How far are you living from where the layout is?
3 days a week I work in Austin, so I'm actually 3 hours away.
Wow.
Yeah, so normally on weekends I'm in town here. Yeah, but on weekdays I'm usually not. So sometimes it's a 3.5 hour drive between where I live on weekdays and here on weekends.
Holy moly.
Yeah, so sometimes I'll just bring buildings or freight cars with me between the places to build them or weather them or something. It works out.
Yeah, it's quite a ways away, but boy, are you passionate about keeping this layout going. And it's just, again, super cool that, you the layout you grew up with and, being able to keep that going is just a really phenomenal thing.
Was it 2 years ago I started to do what some of the guys in the layout did? So actually I'll take vacations once here to Chicago to actually measure some of the buildings I have to build. So I went to the Highlands and measured the newer Metro shed on the other side with tape measure and photos and stuff. Some little kid was there and kept asking why is this guy measuring the building?
Because of accuracy. That's why, because you want to make sure that it's exactly right.
When I was a kid, we went up there maybe 2 or 3 times a year to see it. So it's nice to be able to go back there myself once or twice a year to do the same thing.
In the talking points that you had given me, you had mentioned something and I wanted to get your take on it. And you wrote, I don't model where I live. I model Chicago living in Texas, BNSF layouts based in New England. And I can only think of one BNSF layout in New England. That'd be our good friend Mark Herrick's layout. But why do you think that's the case? Why do you think it's guys like that model not their neighborhood, but they model somewhere far, far away like you are doing and what Mark's doing?
I think it's just people will see videos of a railroad, or maybe they'll rail film there once and they'll like it so much they just want to model it. There are actually very few layouts in Texas where they actually model Texas. There's several C&O layouts here. There's a lot of Rio Grande layouts. In the Dallas-Fort Worth area, most people are originally not from there. So you have a lot of NP layouts and Milwaukee layouts in Dallas-Fort Worth. I think it's some people I guess where they were originally from, then they moved to Texas, or maybe they saw a video or read a book on the railroads elsewhere and they just liked it so much that's what they wanted to model. Yeah, but I think it's interesting just how many layouts they model somewhere that's nowhere near where they actually live.
Yeah, I was debating that again in our conversation beforehand with Matthew Fricks, and we were kind of, why is that? And, I got, kind of our take and Matt was kind of questioning it too. Why is there a good amount of layouts where guys don't even, haven't lived or don't live in an area yet they model it? And I told him for us up here in New England, I think we just fantasize about big railroading because in reality, we don't have it up here. I mean, we have a great railroad history. Don't get me wrong, New Haven and, then even, into Conrail and all the big rail, Boston and Maine and the B&A and just tons of history here. But we don't have that really big time railroading that, like Mark's doing the High Line. I mean, we don't get that kind of traffic out this way. We see on a busy road, we see a few trains a day or, maybe a small handful, but we don't get that. We don't get the racetrack in Chicago either. We don't get that busyness. So I think that's what we kind of fantasize about. And of course the scenery, I mean, we're so used to the scenery up here. Some folks may come up here and say New England's very scenic, and I'm sure, it is. But when you go out and you see the big mountains of Montana and the beautiful creeks and the valleys and for, I think that's part of it too. It's just the fantasy of something different than what we see all the time. And I think that's a big piece of it too.
Yeah, I agree. I think the scenery and the amount of trains, like this part of Texas is fairly flat. So if you want to know Colorado or Montana, you might want to do like a mountain railroad. I can definitely see that. And it's the frequency of trains. Like my mom's family's from Germany. So in the 90s, I spent a lot of summers in Germany.
Oh, wow.
So I would go to like the Frankfurt train station. Let's sit on the platform and see, like 50 Deutsche Bahn passenger trains come in and out. It's like the racetrack in Chicago is like one of the most similar to that. So I've just always been fascinated with, tons of passenger trains going in and out of a station or terminal, and just, being able to model that in like HO scale and, feasibly being able to do that on a layout.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's, again, being able to take what we love and being able to capture it and then model it and kind of own it in our own way. So it's, definitely neat to think about. So new structures and being able to run it updated. Are you doing anything with the layout on the 1959 side of things?
Yeah, the last year I added probably 6 stock cars to lay out this building and weathering them. I'm doing more like waybills to different industries. Like I'm starting to do a lot of waybills to the C&W Wood Street yard, which in the 50s was the potato terminal for Chicago. So I'm having a lot of cars coming from like Colorado with all the potato areas and Idaho to potato areas, and having those go to the C&W Wood Street yard, which is where all the potatoes are unloaded in Chicago. And I've actually added the Milwaukee local in Rochelle, added another local, because not all the operators like running passenger trains. So I've tried to add as many locals as I can. I think there are now 6 locals on the layout, including the one Milwaukee one, like I said. Just trying to get more diversity of the like types of trains.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive that you're able to run so much on this layout, and really, really, really cool story you've been able to share with us, Michael. I appreciate you coming on Around the Layout and doing that and keeping us up to date. So what do you see as the future for the layout? I mean, you got a lot of challenge to you. You're living quite a bit away and doing this. I mean, what do you foresee the future being for the CB&Q?
I think the future is this, finishing the scenery. There's still a tremendous amount of ballast that I have to do. Right now I'm doing the ballast going into Chicago and the curve there. Yeah, that's one of the pictures I sent you. Yeah, once I finish that, then I have to install the signal bridge there. Then I'll finally get around to actually making a video of the layout. And there's still probably 5 more signal bridges that I have to add.
So that's awesome. The CB&Q will continue to build, and you'll be able to continue to add to your dad's legacy and make it your own, and something very special there. So again, Michael, thank you for coming on Around the Layout and sharing your story with us.
Thank you. It's great being on your podcast.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.